Hi, everyone. Okay, so let's get started. We are for today's Kuzari shir. Let's just remind everyone where we are. I'm going to put everyone on mute if that's okay. You can always unmute yourself later. Okay. We are in the Kuzari on page 393 in the Feldheim edition, fourth essay, section 3, subparagraph 3. We were talking about how philosophers of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's time, some of the great medieval philosophers, especially in the Islamic world, that was the milieu in which Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was working, had come to certain conclusions about God. Based on their, it's important to know that the Islamic philosophers of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's time were largely steeped in Aristotelian philosophy. Aristotle had a lot to say about his concept of God. Didn't identify him as God, he identified him as the prime mover, or as the prime cause of all that exists. It was a very impersonal God, a God who was not aware of the goings-on of mankind, because this God transcends. It's a very transcendent God who transcends all time and space, does not exist within time and space, is therefore, even though it's a sentient being, is not aware of the goings-on of everything that's happening in our world on a chronological and spatial plane, but is the source of all that exists. God is constantly emanating to sustain creation. Okay, so that's what we were talking about up until now. Before I go any further, let me also mention that that we have a sponsor for today's shir. I just want to mention that Michelle Kahn is today's sponsor for the shir, and the shir is in a memory and it's a celebration of the life of her brother, Michael Kalman ben Tzvi Mordechai. May his neshama have an aliyah. Okay, so let us continue in our discussion. Okay. All right, so we're up to subparagraph 3. None of these philosophers can identify their God by its definitive name, but one who has heard God's words, his command and admonition, his offer of reward for serving him and punishment for sinning against him, such a person is able to call God by his definitive name, which describes the entity that has spoken to him. So once again, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is continuing the discussion about how the prophetic experience allows one to really identify God, to know God, and to really understand what God's essential nature is on some plane or on some level that is comprehensible to the human mind. It is a truism for such a person that God created the world ex nihilo, that God created the world from nothing. Now, why is it a truism for that person? Because once the person understands God's nature, he understands that God is a volitional being, a being who can bring into existence anything that he so wishes, and therefore it is quite contrary to the God of the philosophers. The God of the philosophers is the God who doesn't create at will, because that God has no will, so to speak. It's for Aristotle, it was incorrect and even inappropriate to suggest that at some point God created all of existence, because that would in essence suggest that God was missing something in his existence that compelled him to create. In other words, anytime I wish to produce something, it's because I feel a sense of lack, privation. Something's missing in my life. And so therefore, I supplement my life by producing something. Whether I produce an essay, a piece of art, or even just producing work product of any kind, I do so because I feel I need to, in order to make myself complete or whole, or do what I feel I need to do in order to fulfill my destiny. So to suggest that God created at some point means that at some point God was deprived or lacking in some way, and that's impossible to say about a being of perfection. So this is one of the great mysteries, which is that on the one hand, we do believe that God has haya hove v'yihiyeh, always was, is, and will be in a completely static state of perfection. But at the same time, we also believe that at one given moment, God created the world from nothing. And it's one of the mysteries that we don't really fully comprehend. And we resign ourselves to the pasuk that kilo machshavotay machshavotehem velo darchechem derachai, that it really isn't possible to understand Hashem fully. But the person who has the prophetic experience recognizes that this, and perhaps it's only because of prophecy that a person can comprehend God in this way, because you're experiencing something. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's thesis is sometimes you can experience something that is inexplicable. I can't explain it intellectually, rationally I can't explain it, but if you experience it, that experience transcends the rational. It's almost like try to explain love rationally to another person. There are certain things that are irrational, but when you experience them, you know that they're real. You know, love is one such example, totally irrational. And that's just the way it is. And that's why for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, and perhaps because he had that artistic soul, he's able to express it in this way. The only nation which has a special name for Hashem, which is descriptive of God's innateness, is the Jewish people who experienced him firsthand at Har Sinai, heard God's words, his command and admonition, his offer of reward for serving him and punishment for sinning against him. Okay, now the first of such people, subparagraph 4, was Adam. Adam knew about God only from his conversations with him, from God's rewards and punishments in the Garden of Eden, and from the fact that he had made Chava from one of his sides, Sal Otav, or from his rib, or from however you understand how God took a portion of his body to create woman. Consequently, it became clear to Adam that God was the creator of the universe. He was able to recognize God through his words and prophetic images, and was thereby able to identify him as Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Without this, however, Adam would have known God only as Elohim, which does not clarify what God really is, whether he is one or multiple entities, whether or not he is cognizant of the separate components within nature, and so on. It just means that God is the source of all forces and all that exists, but it doesn't describe God in any other innate way. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, however, does describe God as a creator God, a unitary God, and that's the term that can only be understood through prophecy. Okay, so I didn't want to spend a lot of time on the Kuzari today because I have some good stuff for the Parsha, but are there any questions or any comments at this point? This is the idea of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei being God's essential name, and also implying through an understanding of that name that God is capable of, despite his perfection, inserting himself within time and space to create and to interact within the human condition. Okay, very good. Okay, so with that, I just wanted to do a little bit, just to touch a little bit upon the Kuzari today, and now I'd like to move on to the Parsha. So if everyone's ready for that, let me share my screen. I got to bring up the document first. Let me share it. And there we go. Okay, everyone. So today, our title is We're All Cannibals. Isn't that a lovely thought? We're all cannibals. What? Okay, so why are we all cannibals? I hope it'll become clear by the time we're finished with our discussion today. The Torah says, and you can see it here on your screen, Lo telech rachil be'amecha. Do not go or walk as a rachil, which is translated as a talebearer. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Do not stand by your brother, your fellow's blood. Ani Hashem, I am the Lord. Of course, I am the Lord means, usually Rashi says, I am the Lord. When a pasuk ends in that way, it means to say that you may think you can cover your tracks and make sure that no one else knows what you're doing, but I am Hashem. I can see what's going on. Okay, Rashi uncharacteristically has a long commentary over here as to what the word rachil means. And I've underlined the pertinent parts because I don't want to belabor Rashi too much today. But Rashi says as follows. What does the term rachil mean? Lo telech rachil. Ani omer al shem shekol mishalchei madanim umisaprei lashon hara. I suggest that the word rachil is so called because anyone who sends forth strife and speaks lashon hara, holchim bivate re'ehem l'ragel ma yir'ura. They do so for how do you plot to speak lashon hara? You spy on a person first and see what schmutz can I get on that person. Okay, so that you go to your friend's house, you can hire a private investigator, or you can just go yourself and just snoop around. That's what the word leragel means, to snoop or to spy. And what can I see evil about this person? Oma yishmu rak l'saper, oma yishmu ra l'saper bashuk. Or what evil can they hear about this person so that they can tell it over in the marketplace? Such a person is nikraim holchei rachil. That's the term rachil. You are a goer, you are a traveler. To be a rachil, to be able to relate tales. Holchei rigila. And that means that you are going in order to spy. That's what the word rachil means. It means you're going to spy on a person so that you may speak lashon hara about them. And apparently in Old French, I don't know how to even pronounce it. I won't embarrass myself. But for anyone who's a French speaker, maybe you can make out something from that word, rigoul. In the parentheses, it says it means to scout or snoop on someone. Varaya lidvarai. Now, let me bring you a proof that what I'm saying is correct. And then Rashi brings a number of psukim to support himself, which we're not going to look at right now. But then he says, based on those psukim, lakachani omer shelashon rachil lashon holech umeragel. I say that the word rachil comes from the idea of traveling and scouting. And the reason why rachil is implied that, he says, shahakaf nechlefet begimel. Rashi gives us a little bit of etymology. He says the word rachil could also be read as ragil, from the word leragel, which is to spy, like the word meraglim, right, from the spies of the story in Parsha Shlach. Shekol ha'otiot shemotzaehem mimakom echad mitchalfot zu bazu. Ignore that letter kuf, that's a typo. All the letters that find their origin in the same part of the mouth can interact with each other. Now, what does he mean from the same part of the mouth? There are 5 different letter groups phonetically. What do I mean by that? Well, there's different parts of your mouth that are responsible for pronouncing different letters. So, for example, there are something called otiot hasfatayim, lip letters. What do we mean by lip letters? The letter P, the letter B, the letter, I'm not sure what else, mem, right? All of those are lip letters because you use your lips to pronounce that letter. There are letters that are otiot hachech, the letters of the palate, because you close your tongue against your palate in order to pronounce those letters. And that's what gimel and kaf are part of. They're part of that letter group. The phonetics of gimel and kaf use the same palate to pronounce those letters. And so that's the reason why Rashi feels that they can be interchanged, which is unusual for Rashi to say. I don't know if Rashi says this anywhere else. I'd have to look around to see if he says it anywhere else. But I think it's a very rare thing for Rashi to make this kind of letter substitution in a shoresh based on the location of the phonetics in the mouth. So this is one of those few times that he does this. Now, v'chein rochel hasocher umeragel achar kol schora. Rashi says this would also explain why a person who's an itinerant merchant is also called a rochel. Okay, because why? Because v'chol hamocher b'samim lihitkashet b'hem anashim. A rochel is also the term used for a person who travels from town to town selling women's cosmetics and jewelry. You know, the guy at the kiosk in the mall would be a rochel. But in the old days, he would go from town to town. He'd have like a briefcase or a suitcase, and he'd open it up on a stand and set up in the middle of the town square. And then when he would finish selling his wares in one shtetl, he'd go to the next shtetl, and that's how he would make his living. And that person was called a rochel, a traveling salesman. Al shem shemechazer tamid ba'ayarot nikra rochel lashon rogel. It's the same idea. You're going traveling from place to scout out prospects. It's the same idea. You're a rogel or a miragel, a scout, going to scout out a place where you can find opportunity. That's why you're called a rochel, rochel, it's the same idea. Okay, so that's the first idea that Rashi presents. That's why the word talebearer is called a rachil or a rochel, because it means you're traveling around to snoop for opportunities to speak lashon hara. Okay, that's number one. Now Rashi brings us a second interpretation of what the word rachil means from the Targum Onkelos. Lo techol kortzin. It means literally, do not eat a snack. That's what the word means, lo techol kortzin. That's how Onkelos translates lo techel rachil, lo telech rachil. It means do not eat a snack. Kemo ba'achlu kartzehon de Yehudaya. This is a pasuk in the book of Daniel, which talks about how the Babylonians at the time when the Jews were in exile spoke ill of the Jews because they were not bowing down to the avodah zarah of the time. They were not complying with the national religious interest, and this caused the Jews to get into trouble with Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? So that's the pasuk, and Daniel says, "Va'achlu kartzeon de Yehudaya." They ate a snack against the Jews. Means literally they slandered, or they gave a negative report about the Jews. And achal bekurza bemalka, we find the same term in the Talmud, in Tractate Brachot, and in a number of other places. He went ahead and informed to the government against the Jews. There's a famous story where this occurs, and the very same language is used of achal bekurza. Does anyone know that famous story? It's the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story. That Bar Kamsa, when he sees that the rabbis at the meal are not protesting his great humiliation because the host of the party wants to throw him out of the house. You're all familiar with that story, yes, where the host is making a party and he sends an invitation and it gets lost in the delivery process. And instead of sending it to Kamsa, who was a friend, he sent it instead to Bar Kamsa, who was an enemy When the guy shows up, the host says, I'm throwing you out of the house, no matter what kind of offer you make. And he noted that the rabbis were there, saw this man being humiliated, and kept their mouths shut, didn't say a word. And he felt that if the rabbis can stand by while someone is humiliating me, it means that they don't mind, they don't care. And what a terrible thing. So that he went ahead and created a pretense to get the Jews in trouble with the government. And so that's what Achal Bei Kurza Bei Malka. He said, Echel Bei Kurza Bei Malka, let me go and inform on the Jews to the government. And it's the very same language of tattletaling. Okay, Nira Be'enai. So the question is, why is tail-bearing called eating a snack? Why is it called that way? He says, Nira Be'enai, Shahayam Mishpatam Le'echol Beveit HaMekabel Divrehem Shum Hal'ata. It seems to me that it's because whenever two people would get together and one person would open up with some juicy gossip, the other person would eat a snack to signify that he was accepting that person's report. Buhu gamar chizuk, and that was a way of sort of showing support for that person's tale bearing. Shedvarav mikuyamim v'yamideim al ha'emet. That basically by eating something, I'm sort of endorsing what you've just told me about that other person or parties, and I am endorsing it as true. V'ota hal'ata nikret alicha achilat kurtzin. So eating that little cookie or whatever it was called eating kurtzin. Lashon koretz be'inav. And the reason why it's called kurtzin is because the word koretz is to give a guy a wink. You know, you wink. Sort of shekain derech kol holchei rachil likrotz be'einehem v'lirmos divrei rechilutan. Because this too is also the way of people who are talebearers. You give a little wink, you give a little gesture with your eye or your face, you give a little click with your tongue, shelo yavinu sha'ar hashomeim, and it's done with a wink or a nod so that other people shouldn't perceive what's going on. So, echol bekurza means let me eat a snack to endorse what you're saying, but it's done with basically like a surreptitious way of endorsing what you're doing, and therefore it's called kurza. Okay, very bizarre. So these two terms, these two sort of explanations from Rashi are both unusual, sort of out of the ordinary, I would say. The first interpretation of Rashi is Rachil comes from the word ragil or rogel, which requires us to interchange the gimel and the chaf, something that Rashi would not normally do. Second interpretation, which is from Targum Onkelos, is to echol be kurza, let me eat a snack. The word rachil comes from eating a snack. And Rashi basically says that the word rochel means an eater, not a talebearer. And the reason why it's called an eater is because it was the custom of whenever you would hear someone else give you a negative report, you would eat a cookie of endorsement, okay? Which is another very unusual interpretation. Would you not agree? Huh? Okay, so that's where we're going. We're going on that journey, okay? So very good, Karen. So the Ramban has a problem with Rashi, especially the second interpretation. And he says, Ve'ein bama shepiresh betargum hazeh ta'am oreach. He says, the way Rashi explains the Targum has no tam vareach. It has no fragrance and it has no taste. In other words, I totally disagree. This doesn't make any sense. Ki hashomea min harachil lo yishbalo sheyamin devarav v'lo yitain lo otum ofet. He says, because why is it necessary when you hear Lashon Hara to endorse and give something to someone as a sign of endorsement? There's no need for it. It doesn't always happen, and it's not something that's a part and parcel of the Lashon Hara. So I don't understand why that should be the definitive term for speaking Lashon Hara, because it doesn't always happen, and it's not necessary for the Lashon Hara to transpire. Gam hamalshin eved el adonav lo yavtichenu ha'adon sheyishma elav. He says, and furthermore, if you just because I think what he means is that if a servant gives a report to his master, the master doesn't feel a sense of indebtedness to endorse what the servant is saying. Umatam la'achila hazot. So what's the point of this kind of eating? And so the Ramban has a different explanation of the Targum, which we're not going to get into now. But I do want to defend Rashi. And the defense of Rashi, the way he understands that it means eating a snack, can be found, is based on a pasuk in Tehillim as it's understood by Sefer HaAruch, which I'll get to in just a second. We say, that kapitel David Hashem Ori that we say in Elul, it's Psalms chapter 27, and it says as follows, Bikrov alai mireim le'echol et bisari, when cohorts come against me, le'echol et bisari, to eat my flesh. Sarai v'oivai, they are my oppressors and my enemies. Hema kashalu v'nafalu, they will stumble and fall. And the point that David HaMelech is making is that I know that I can rely on Hashem to save me from those who would like to eat my flesh. So what does he mean, eat my flesh? Obviously, he doesn't mean it literally. David was not in constant fear of being eaten, right? So the Aruch, Sefer HaAruch was first composed in the 11th century, but there were additions and addenda that were added to Sefer HaAruch. It's an encyclopedia, or really a Talmudic encyclopedia of words and terminologies of not only the Talmud, but also of words that are found in Tanakh. And in the word, in the Shoresh Kuf Reish Tzadi, he states that V'chein Pirush Rabbeinu Ibn Ezra Daniel Sham the Achlu Kartsehon Targum Lo Telech Rachil. He says that if you look at the Ibn Ezra, you'll find that in Daniel chapter 3 that Rashi quoted, he also translates Achlu Kartsehon, they ate a snack, as they went ahead and bore tales about the Jews. Hamidaber b'seiter ra'a al echad ki'ilu ochel b'saro, because he who speaks secretly about another person is tantamount to eating their flesh. Ba'ayin Rabbi Meir Lunzano b'Ma'arich Erech Keretz, he quotes from another linguist, Behevi Lashon Mikra le'echolet b'sari, he quotes that same language from the pasuk in Tehillim, the Imkain Achal Kurza, and therefore when you have this term, he went ahead and ate a snack, Piresh Achal Chatichot Meish Ploni Asher Dibru Alav Rechilut. That what it means is to bear tales about someone is like eating pieces of his flesh. V'chein b'lashon Aravi Karas Pirush Halach Rachil. See, in Arabic also, Kuf, you have the Ka, Ra, and Sa, and that also is the same idea of tail bearing. So why is it compared? Why is tail bearing? And it's certainly Rashi is defended by the Aruch, and based on these psukim, why is it that tail bearing is called eating a person's flesh, taking a nibble out of a person? So we're going to try and understand that. But before we do, I wanted to share with you, when I saw this commentary, it brought to mind the a scene from a film that I thought I would share with you, if you don't mind. I'd like to share that with you now. Let me just see how I'm going to do this. Hold on. Stop the share. And I'm going to share another share sound, optimize for video clip. And we're going to watch this together. Okay, everybody ready?
Mama, Yente the matchmaker is coming.
Maybe she's finally found a good match for you, Zeitel.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Why does she have to come now? It's almost Sabbath.
Out, all of you. I want to talk to Yente alone.
But, Mama, the men she finds. The last one was so old. And he was bald. He had no hair.
A poor girl without a dowry can't be so particular. You want hair, marry a monkey.
Even a poor girl without a dowry has to look at her husband sometime.
A husband is not to look at. A husband is to get.
But, Mama, I'm not yet 20 years old. I don't think I have to.
Do you have to boast about your age? Do you want to tempt the evil eye? Oh, out, all of you. There's work to be done before the Sabbath. Hurry. All of you, hurry.
I just want you to watch what Yente does with the food.
Golda, I have such news for you. And not every day in the week news, once in a lifetime news. Such diamonds, such jewels. I'll find a husband for every one of them. But you shouldn't be so picky, right? Of course, right. Because after all, even the worst husband, God forbid, is better than no husband. God forbid. And who should know better than me? Ever since my husband died, I've been a poor widow, all alone, no one to talk to, nothing to say to anyone. All I do at night is think of him. And even thinking of him gives me no pleasure.
Is Seidel in the house?
Why don't you go in and find out?
Thank you, Belka.
Did we never raised his voice?
Good afternoon. Is Seidel in the house?
She's busy. Come back later.
But there's something I'd like to tell her.
Later.
Later.
What does that poor skinny tailor want with Zeitel?
They've been friends since they were babies. They talk, they play.
They play? What do they play?
I don't know. They're children.
Oh, from such children come other children.
Mottle is nothing. Yente, you said you had news for me.
Ah, children. They are your blessing in your old age. But my Aaron, may he rest in peace, couldn't give me children. To tell you the truth, Golda, he hardly tried. But what's the use complaining? Other women enjoy complaining, not Yente. Not every woman in the world is a Yente. Well, I have to go home now to prepare my poor Sabbath meal. So, goodbye, Golda.
Watch the cookies.
And it was a pleasure talking our hearts out to each other.
Yente, you said you had news for me.
I'm losing my head. Someday it'll fall off altogether, and a horse will kick it in the mud, and goodbye, Yente. Of course, the news. It's about Laser Wolf the butcher. A good man, a fine man, and I don't have to tell you he's well off, no? Yes. But he's lonely, the poor man. After all, he's been a widower all these years. You understand. Of course you do. So, to make it short, out of the whole town, he's cast his eye on Zeitel.
My Zeitel?
No, the Tsar's Zeitel. Of course you're Zeitel.
Such a match for my Zeitel. But Tevye wants a learned man. He doesn't like Laser.
Good, so Laser won't marry him. He wants the daughter, not the father. Listen to me, Golden. You send Tavia to him. Don't tell him what it's about. Let Laser discuss it himself. He'll win him over. He's a good man and a wealthy man. So, you'll let me know how it went, and you don't have to thank me, Golden, because aside from my fee, which Laser will pay anyway, it gives me satisfaction to make people happy.
True. Of course, true. So, goodbye, Goldie, and you're welcome.
Goodbye, Yenta. Come, children. Get changed for the Sabbath. Hurry.
I can't tell.
Okay, all right, let me just turn this off. Hold on a second. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed that little 5-minute clip of a talebearer, of a Yenta, who, if you caught it, right after she had her report, what did she do? She grabbed all the cookies, wrapped them up. And that's what I think that's a support of Rashi. In other words, it's basically taking as compensation or as an endorsement or sort of a quid pro quo. I've provided you with something of value and you give me something so that I can eat. And it just strikes me as something instinctive. Because we recognize we're nibbling on someone, we have this instinct to eat. There's always, the human beings have sometimes an instinct to eat something even when they're not hungry. You know how we talk about nervous eating or eating by compulsion? We do so because we feel that we're missing something, we're lacking something, and we want to put something inside of ourselves as a way of trying to make ourselves whole. But when it comes to specifically receiving a report that is negative about somebody else, there is that tendency, that instinct within the human being to wish to eat upon hearing a report that is negative of someone else. And the question is why? So it's not just because in a figurative way, we're eating them, we're cannibalizing them, we're harming them in that way. But it actually goes even further than that. So I want to share with you the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Let me just share my screen once again. And we'll continue along this in the sources. It says in Pirkei Avos in chapter 3, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim Omer. Rabbi Chanina, who is the vice high priest, used to say, Havei mitpalel bishloma shel malchut. Be careful to pray for the welfare of the government, she'ilmalei mora'ah, for were it not for the fear it inspires, ish et re'ehu chayim bila'o. Every man would swallow his neighbor alive. Every man would swallow his neighbor alive. Now, that language is very curious because you could say that he simply means that without the government, there would be chaos. Without a police force, there would be chaos, and everyone would try to dominate the other person, or everyone would try to exploit another person, or there would be a breakdown in society. Why does he use the language of ish et re'ehu chayim bila'o? Each person would try to swallow another person alive. So the Maharal, in his commentary to Pirkei Avos, which is called Derech Chaim, has an interesting interpretation of this. Let me just see if there's, I think a couple of people were trying to get across some comments over here. For some reason, it's not working, but we'll try to get it going soon. Okay, so the Maharal states as follows. Ka'asher titbonein be'inyan habriya. He says, when you think about creation, Timtza ha'adam sheyesh lo shinui b'briato ma'shelo nimtza b'sha'ar ha'nivraim. You will discover that a human being in his origin story, in his creation story, is different from all other created beings. Shekol sha'ar nivraim nivru harbe biyachad, v'ha'adam nivra biyichidi. All other animals were created in packs. It doesn't say that God created one chicken or one cow or even a pair of cows, but that God created all other living creatures in groups, the fish, the birds, the animals, but not, there was the only being that was created solitary was the human being. V'yoter mizeh, sha'af ha'nekeva shelo, shahaya ra'ui shetihiyeh nivreit bifnei atzma im ha'adam, v'lo hayazeh rak nivra ha'adam yichidi. And that ultimately is the reason why male and female were not created separately, because God wanted there to be a very specific idea implanted within the human psyche, which is that you were created as a solitary being, alone and disparate from everything else. Uveperek echad dinei mamonot, and in the tractate Sanhedrin it says, Tanu Rabbanan, there's a braita which states as follows: Lefichach nivra ha'adam yichidi. Why was man created in a solitary state? Lelamedcha shekol ha'me'abed nefesh achat miYisrael ma'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu ibeid et kol ha'olam. Because it's to teach you that if you destroy even one soul, it's as if you're destroying an entire world, because every human being is a microcosm of the entire world, and every human being represents the original creation of Adam. This famous quote, if you save one life, it's as if you saved the entire world. And I'm skipping a little bit of the Braita because of time, and it says, Ulefichach kol echad ve'echad chayav lomar bishvili nivra ha'olam adkan. And the Talmud concludes by saying that it is for this reason, because man was created as a solitary being, it gives the human being that sense of pride to say, the world was created for my sake alone. Every human being is an individual, every human being is unique, and if God felt it worthwhile to create an entire world for one human being, then it's also for my sake as well. Now, Perush hadavar hazeh. So the Maharal says, to try and explain this, he says, Ki lefi mitziut ha'olam b'tziur ha'chochma lo hayat tzarich sheyeh rak adam echad v'lo yoter. Really, it was only necessary for there to be one human being in control of the entire world. And the reason is, V'cheshem she'ra'oi lefi tziur ha'chochma shiyu shara minim arbei, kach ra'oi sheyeh nivra ha'adam yichidi. Just like it was appropriate for other species of creatures to be created multitudinously, it was also appropriate for man to be created as just a singular being. Really, when you think about it, if man would have lived forever, there would have been no reason for there to be more than one human being. Why is that? Ki hadam hu melech batachtonim. Because man was designed by God to be the ruler over all of this worldly creation. The davar ze yadua ki ra'ui sheyeh hamelech echad ki ein ra'ui sheyeh shnei melachim. We don't normally associate rulership with more than one person. If man was designed to be the ruler of this world, then there really only needs to be one human being. Ulefichach hamekayem adam echad ki'ilu kiyem kol ha'olam v'chein hame'abed echad ki'ilu ibeid kol ha'olam. And that's the reason why when you save one life, it's like you're saving the whole world, because each person really innately is a monarch, a ruler. We all have that sense of being in control. It's like the famous line from from David Ben-Gurion, when he was visited by, I think it was President Johnson. I think that's how the story goes. I don't remember for sure, but he said to the prime minister, "You think your problems are great? I've got 150 million people that I have to attend to." And Ben Gurion said, "Well, I have 5 million prime ministers that I have to attend to." Okay, so that was ulafichach, and therefore maybe 3 million at that time. Ulafichach im lo haya mora malchut, and therefore the Maharal says, if there wasn't this fear of government, the fear of government authority, ki hamelech hu mekasher umeached haklal, He says, the idea is that a king is the uniting force. He takes all of the disparate subjects of his kingdom and unifies them under one banner of the monarchy. Because it's natural for man to feel as himself as an individual, as unitary, as just alone as the sole individual. Man has a tendency to seek to eliminate all of his competitors because he seeks to be, there's an instinct to be solitary and unitary and the head honcho. Okay, so if it weren't for government authority that unites all of us to feel together, each person would feel that sense of complete autonomy and a desire to eliminate all other competing forces that exist. Shaharei kol adam omer bishvili nivra ha'olam v'hu bilvad ra'ui ba'olam. Every person has an instinctive quality that says, the whole world is for me. If the whole world is for me, what are you doing on it, right? And that's the reason why every person has a natural instinct to swallow the other person, to eliminate the other person. And that's why there's a tendency for man to swallow someone else so that he's the only remaining individual. And that's why Rabbi Hanina advocates to pray for the welfare of the government, because if it weren't for the government that unites all of the disparate individuals, because if not, everyone would swallow each other up. Because every person feels that the whole world is for them. Because he only wants there to be him. He doesn't need any competitors. The whole world is mine. What are you doing on it? Right? It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to me. That's the instinct within every individual. So that's the idea of swallowing up the other. The reason why I believe that there is a difference in language, because achal bekurtza is to nibble on someone, and here the Mishnah talks about swallowing them whole. What's the difference? He says, when there is governmental authority, and when you know that halacha is watching you, and that Jewish practice frowns upon this practice of speaking ill of another, then you nibble on them very quietly and slowly so that it's not detectable. Like if I just nibble on your small toe, then everyone else looks like you're still intact. That's the idea of Lashon Hara, is that I just take off a little part of you and I erode you bit by bit. In the Mishnah, it's swallowing a person whole, because if there's no governmental authority, every person would swallow each other whole because no one cares. The world was mine, you have no place in it. Okay, so that's the difference between the two, but it's the same idea. We wish to eliminate the competition. We wish to eliminate anyone whose agenda differs from ours. We wish to eliminate anyone whom we perceive as a threat to our own personal agenda, regardless of whether that person has validity or not. It's not my opinion, it's not my agenda, and therefore you don't have any place in my world. It's my world, it's not yours. That's the instinct that exists within people, and that's why it's called lo telech rachil be'amecha, do not try and nibble on the other person. So let me just see what the comments are at this point. For some reason, yes, Rachel, please.
way, Lashon Hara, whatever, and I'm not saying he's perfect or anything, but they did the same thing to him.
Well, in politics has Lashon Hara routinely. That's why you shouldn't.
I think it's awful. Forgive me for
Yeah, sure.
I think it's awful that in Eretz Israel, without managing, without people that are in government, that they can do such things and they don't learn from what you are showing us here.
You would think that Israeli politicians, because they're Jewish and have Jewish values, is what Rachel is saying, that they would comport themselves with more dignity and in conforming with Jewish values of not speaking Lashon Hara. Welcome to the real world, right? Yeah, I know. Yeah. So anyway, one of our people who's on the Zoom, I don't know who this is because they just identify themselves as Zoom user, says that eating is also a sense of entitlement. I see it done at work daily. I'm not sure what your work is, but maybe if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can let us know what you have in mind. But
Hi there. Yeah, this is
Hi.
Annie. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so I work at a long-term care. So I see when staff start siding with each other and somebody's cooking, that the one who's doing the talking feels entitlement to eat some of that food that the other person is cooking, just to nibble as a way of siding with each other. They claw each other in that way.
Yeah, that's I suppose that's really what what Rashi is suggesting, right? I mean, that's really what
Right.
Rashi is suggesting. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Right? You focused on the first half, Lo Tele Kotel, but the second part is Lo Tamud Adam Re'echa, which is again is another view to the whole kindness story as well. If you really want to be the only one in the world, and relate back to Lo Tamud Adam Re'echa.
Precisely. The second part of the verse says, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, do not stand by your brother's blood, is because when you start nibbling them, they're going to bleed. And their blood will be lost. And that, of course, is the connection between the first part of the pasuk and the second, as Karen properly points out. For some reason, my computer was freezing, so I'll just say out loud for you the last line that I always enjoy quoting. I heard it for the first time from my friend Ezra Levovsky, but I since have learned that it was stated by a number of wise people before. It's attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, but it actually is older than her. This quote: "Great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people." So it's true that it's small-minded to do that because you succumb to a baser instinct. But what the Maharal has told us is that the instinct actually comes from a place of holiness, but it is corrupted by the individual when they try to nibble on another person. So the Maharal really has defended sort of the instinct. Why did God make me with this instinct to try and destroy somebody else, to try and speak Lashon Hara? So the Maharal's whole practice, his whole exercise in this commentary is to tell us it comes from actually a good place. It comes from a place of you feeling that you are royalty and you do have a right to your opinion, and you should be validated for wanting to be to say Bishvili nivra olam, the whole world is mine. Now, with that said, that the whole world is yours, if you start to nibble on another person, what you're failing to acknowledge is the whole world is theirs also. And even though that may seem to be contradictory, how can the whole world be mine and his or hers at the same time? Understand that that person has just as much validity to their conquest of the world as I do to mine. And whenever we forget that and we just look at ourselves as being the most important, we forget that the other person is also most important. We're both the most important in this world. And that's what we have to try and keep in mind. And so the fact that the Torah concludes the pasuk by saying, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, is very deliberate, I think, because the Gemara many times says Why should your blood be redder than your fellows? Is your blood any redder than his or hers? The answer is no. The life force courses through your veins. The Tselem Elokim runs through your essence as much as it does to the other person. They don't have more rights than you, but you don't have more rights than them. And therefore, you have no sanction to look at their blood as being of lesser value than your own. And so that's really the most important thing I wanted to try and convey today, is that even though it does come from a place of holiness, we need to learn how to control that idea as well. Okay, so I think we'll hold it here for today. Let me wish you a good rest of the week. Enjoy Yom HaAtzmaut, and we'll see you Bezrat Hashem next time. Take care.